ascertained that that was not the fact. And the American people could have known that within days, and they didn't know that.
With all due respect, the fact is we had 4 dead Americans. Was it because of a protest, or was it because of guys out for a walk one night who decided they'd go kill some Americans? What difference at this point does it make? What difference at this point does it make? It is our job to figure out what happened and do everything we can to prevent it from ever happening again, Senator.
The witnesses, who are normally government officials who know the ins and outs of their jobs and all that goes on better than the interrogators do, that was certainly the case to a considerable extent here. It was a crowded hearing which allowed the chairman to say, okay, we're going to have 5-minute rounds. It's very hard to develop a line of questioning in a 5-minute round. And of course, when your 5-minute round is, if you're one of the ones who's trying to get to the bottom of the thing and not to protect the witness, your 5-minute round is over, and then one of the protectors comes on and goes for 5 minutes or so. So everything is sort of chopped up into small pieces. Very smart of Secretary Clinton to have both hearings on the same day, which compresses the length of both. So what you had here today was some argument and some passion, but did we really learn anything new? I'm not sure we did.
Yeah. But when reading the conclusions of the board, one must ask how more money would have made a difference in a bureaucracy plagued by what the board called systemic failures. After all, as the security situation in Libya worsened, the State Department turned away free security assets from the Department of Defense. State Department officials have testified that funding was not an issue.
What were you first told about the attack? Why were people talking about protests? When people in the consulate first saw armed men attacking with guns, there were no protesters.
Because
why did that go on for
exactly what
weeks?
we were told by the intelligence community. The intelligence community told us that. As they learned more facts about exactly what happened, they changed their assessment. We weren't told they wanted more security again. We did not know they wanted more security again. And by the way, at the time, we were told exactly, we said exactly what the intelligence community told us that they knew.
He was speaking directly for himself and for the president. He meant the White House.
It was made by the vice president last night, then made today by the president's press secretary. Then he tried to walk it back because it turns out it's not true. But let's listen to Charlene Lamb.
It has been suggested that budget cuts were responsible for a lack of security in Benghazi, and I'd like to ask Ms. Lamb, you made this decision personally. Was there any budget consideration and lack of budget which led you not to increase the number of people in the security force there?
No, sir. I appreciate your patience for me to be able to come to fulfill my commitment. We should never forget that the security professionals get it right more than 99% of the time against difficult odds, because the terrorists only need to get it right once. And I stood later that day with President Obama as he spoke of an act of terror. In fact, shortly before the attack on Benghazi, we approved Libya for substantial funding from a joint state DoD account for border security, CT capabilities, and WMD efforts.
The communique which indicated that, in fact, those assets, like the security site team, were in fact pulled.
Why were you not interviewed for the review board, by the review board investigators in how can this review be considered thorough when the person at the top, the Secretary of State, was not part of the investigation? That's what was said in our open hearing when it was confirmed that you were never questioned for this report, and I think that's outrageous. I was not asked to speak with the Accountability Review Board during their investigation. The specific issues they were looking at regarding the attack on Benghazi were handled by security professionals in the department, and that's where the ARB focused. Obviously, if they had thought that I was relevant or had information that would have helped the investigation, I would have gladly discussed that with them at their request. I did not say that it was video for that it was about the video for Libya. It certainly was for many of the other places where we were watching these disturbances. At the same time, however, I was dealing with
protests against our facilities that were clearly connected to that video.
Right. Yeah.
So we were managing a number of such
Let's just say that
events. We've seen rage and violence directed at American embassies over an awful internet video that we had nothing to do with. It is hard for the American people to make sense of that because it is senseless and it is totally unacceptable. The people of Egypt, Libya, Yemen, and Tunisia did not trade the tyranny of a dictator for the tyranny of a mob.
That it was al-Qaeda. And it took this administration, what, 14 days during a campaign to admit that that was the case.
You briefed the president. Did you tell him that? Or did you tell him, which Admiral Mullen suggests you knew by then, that this was a well-planned and executed terrorist attack? Which was the president told?
Well, first of all, I said the very next morning that it was an attack by heavily armed militants. The president said that morning it was an act of terror.
No acts of terror will ever shake the resolve of this great nation, alter that character, or eclipse the light of the values that we stand for.
Mr. President, this morning you went out of your way to avoid the use of the word terrorism in connection with the Libya attack.
Right.
Do you believe that this was a terrorist attack?
Well, it's too early to know exactly how this came about, what group was involved, but obviously it was an attack on Americans, and we are going to be working with the Libyan government to make sure that we bring these folks to justice one way or the other.
Quickly, a lot has been made about this, and Democrats say it's all about semantics. What do you say? Well, I say that the administration did not want to be charged with losing 4 brave Americans at the hands of an al-Qaeda attack. And I think they bent over backwards for 2 weeks during the campaign in order to try to deny it. And I think that part of that denial was this very video that they put up front and center as the excuse rather than an admission that al-Qaeda was operating in that area, that al-Qaeda was carrying out attacks, that al-Qaeda had attacked our allies, such as the British ambassador, attempted to kill him, and was trying to kill our own personnel. And so that was, in fact, I think, maybe subliminally, the motivation. But certainly, when it goes for 2 weeks in the face of all the evidence reported internationally in the press, it eventually was a position they couldn't sustain. But you still see them trying to rationalize this.
I mean, obviously, we're giving weapons one way or the other to the rebels in Syria through Turkey. Did it come out of Libya? If it did, I'm not sure you'd want to answer that.
Possibility of guns being shipped out. But the thing that I think said that she said that made news was that in the attack at the gas complex in Algeria, that there were weapons from Libya tied to Muammar Gaddafi's stockpile. That was interesting and newsy to me.
She erupted at one point when Republican Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin questioned her about the administration's initial storyline.
We were misled that there were supposedly protests and then something sprang out of that, an assault sprang out of that. And that was easily ascertained that that was not the fact. And the American people could have known that within days, and they didn't know that.
With all due respect, the fact is we had 4 dead Americans. Was it because of a protest, or was it because of guys out for a walk one night who decided they'd go kill some Americans? What difference at this point does it make? It is our job to figure out what happened and do everything we can to prevent it from ever happening again.
When you briefed us, you said unequivocally this was a result of the video. And I remember, in fact, you got pretty upset about it when somebody suggested that this was a terrorist attack.
The video, I did not say that it was video for that it was about the video for Libya. It certainly was for many of the other places where we were watching these disturbances.
She mentioned it the day after she mentioned the video. She mentioned it that day. President Obama mentioned it on October 25th at the UN. It was mentioned time and time again.
And they also
it wasn't until the debate with Mitt Romney that President Obama said, "Oh yeah, we knew it was terror." I even said terror.
You're right
and
to correct me.
Crowley bailed him out.
Had I been president at the time, and I found that you did not read the cables from Benghazi, you did not read the cables from Ambassador Stevens, I would have relieved you of your post. I think it's inexcusable.
I am the Secretary of State. and the ARB made very clear that the level of responsibility for the failures that they outlined was set at the Assistant Secretary level and below. I have to confess here in public, going on the Sunday shows is not my favorite thing to do. It just isn't something that I normally jump to do.
When did you become aware of Ambassador Stevens' requests, and how did you respond to it? And did he ever personally ask you to be involved?
No, and
so you didn't get in?
No, that any of the requests, any of the cables having to do with security did not come to my attention.
And let me just note that Assistant Secretary of State Lamb testified here in Congress that budget considerations played absolutely no role in her decision. It was her decision, not yours, but you approved of, but her decision as to what the level of security would be there at Benghazi. So, and any suggestion that this is a budget issue is off base or political. Madam Secretary, you told the Senate this morning that you learned of the attack around 4 p.m. On that day, and you were involved widely in the coordinated response, which included the Department of Defense and the White House, but did not speak to the President until later that evening. When did you talk to the President?
Two things. On the first point you made, Congressman, the ARB disagreed with that and did find that budget issues were at stake.
Well, she testified under oath, and it was
well, you know, that's why you have an independent group like an ARB. That's why it was created to look at everything. So I think
everybody has their own
right. I think it's important, though,
to do here. But
and I would urge.
What about when you saw the President? When did you see the President? And
I talked to the President at the end of the day, but I had been in constant communication with the National Security Advisor. I'd been on secure video conferences with high-level officials in the White House, in the Defense Department.
Secretary Lamb, the lady we're talking about, did testified that she had actually witnessed this in real time, the attack in real time on a monitor. At any time, did you see the initial attack on a monitor? Or the President?
Congressman, there was no monitor. There was no real time. We got the surveillance videos some weeks later. That was the first time we saw any video of the attack.
So there was
I think there was a misunderstanding. I think that perhaps, I'm just trying to clarify this. I may be going beyond my brief here, but I think perhaps what she meant was,
was there audio?
she was on an open, she was talking to DS people who were trying to understand what was going on.
Well, I will have to say that Admiral Mullen, in briefing us, suggested that they had seen some kind of video, and that within a few moments, it was very clear that this was a very coordinated terrorist attack, and not some demonstration that had gone awry.
Well, I think the surveillance video, which some of you may have seen in a classified setting, does demonstrate what happened that night.
All right, Mr. Chairman, and just to be clear, if you don't get the answers, you're going to subpoena Secretary Clinton
That is correct. That is correct. We want the answers.
Thank you very much for the time.
Thank you. Good to be with you, Brett.